Thank you so much for joining us today for the Consultative Recruiter with Katherine Moody, and we're going to get started now. But we have a few housekeeping items before we get the whole webinar underway. So the first thing is we've kind of got you covered. So we are currently recording the webinar, and we will send it to you following today's presentation, and we'll also send Katherine's slides. They're very fun slides, so I think you'll enjoy getting those in your inbox. The other thing is we have free stuff. Many of you probably already met or talked with Taya Burns, but she will be sending you a hard copy of Katherine's book. But if you have not given your mailing address to Taya, her email is taya.burns@peoplefluent.com. And we also have a corresponding workbook that Katherine's been so kind to put together and share with our attendees today. And so that will be part of the email that you get. The other thing is we will be pretty active on social media during this, and we want it to be collaborative, and we want your participation. So we are going to be on social media. You can reach us at PeopleFluent, or you can also get me at SheridanOr. And the hashtag we'll be using today is #ConsultativeRecruiter. So I'm SheridanOr, and if you have any questions or technical difficulty, please let me know at sheridan.or@peoplefluent.com or on Twitter at SheridanOr, and I will be your moderator and helping you get your questions answered. And if you have questions, we do have answers, or at least Katherine does. So we have a couple of ways that you can get those to us. You can certainly send them to us on Twitter, or you can send us on the chat panel as we go through the content if you want clarification, or we will have a dedicated Q&A at the end of our webinar. So without further ado, it is my pleasure to introduce a best-selling author, Katherine Moody, who has one of the top recruiting books on Amazon.com, and that's how we found you, Katherine. I don't know if you know that, but and we've really enjoyed working with her. So she is the author of The Consultative Recruiter and How to Do Small Talk, which clearly I probably need today. For the past 27 years, she has been a recruiter and consulting with companies like the Walt Disney Company, the Cheesecake Factory, St. Joseph Healthcare, P.F. Chang's, Fox Entertainment, and Yahoo. She holds an MBA from the University of Southern California and an executive MBA from the Peter Drucker Management Center of Claremont University. And I'm happy to report she has a new hairdo from her picture, and it looks lovely. So, Katherine, thank you so much for joining us today. And before we get started, can you tell us a little bit about what you mean by the Consultative Recruiter?
Yes. Thank you, Sheridan. And so before I answer Sheridan's really good question, I would like to, first of all, thank everyone at PeopleFluent who made this webinar possible for us today. They really follow through on a piece of their vision that says that it is their desire to make your profession as great as possible, which means as great as you would like it to be. And they have been the most supportive, wonderful people to work with as we put this together. They put a lot of time and energy in it. So I am really grateful that they found me on Amazon. And I really appreciate that you have taken the time to join us for this today as well. Consultative recruiter, the reason I've used that term is because when I go into companies to train recruiters, often the request from hiring managers that gets me there in the first place is they would like their recruiters to be more consultative. The interesting thing is most recruiters would like to be more consultative. And so what we're going to talk about today are techniques and strategies to help you bridge that gap. When you are a consultative recruiter, you get a lot of advantages. It does totally improve your recruiting metrics. Searches will go much faster. It streamlines all aspects of a search. You find it's easier to get great candidates to the table, and it certainly builds relationships, and you end up with happier hiring managers. I suspect that you do have good relationships, and I know you have excellent relationships with candidates. What's important is relationships that make things go smoothly. There's a wonderful amount of technology coming at us as recruiters today, but it is your relationship. No matter what the technology is, it's never going to get us to the finish line. as much as a great relationship with hiring managers, HRBPs, anyone else with whom you have to interact. In fact, as you look at the technology that's coming today, it really kind of plays into the myth that if you find great candidates and you find enough of them, you have great relationships. And I learned that lesson the hard way, that finding great candidates is not enough to build great relationships. And the other advantage of being seen as a trusted advisor, consultative recruiter is that you get people to do what you suggest they do. And I just certainly always enjoy having my own way, and it is more fun. So let's talk about the actions that can help you become an even more trusted advisor and consultative recruiter. So this is what recruiting was like, and it's going to be different these days. We need to go to here. I want to make sure that we are clear that I don't want to throw anyone under the bus. I don't want to throw hiring managers under the bus. I don't want to throw you under the bus. This is simply saying this is how it is today, and here's how we can make it even better and more fun tomorrow. I'll also tell you that the fact that you're on this call tells me that you are doing great recruiting work and you're filling positions. And, you know, even if you don't do anything that we talk about today, that will continue. What I would love to think is that you will use some of these techniques and you'll have even more fun and have even more influence. So let's watch just a little bit of this. You may have seen this video. I do apologize, I didn't name it, and I never would have named it recruiter versus hiring manager, because that is absolutely not the perspective that we want. We want to build a team, but sometimes I know it can feel that way, like it is recruiter versus hiring manager. So again, I don't want this to be seen as throwing anybody under the bus, but let's listen to this for just a couple of seconds, and I think probably you will be able to relate. Oh, well, we have some interesting technology here. So now we're going to go back. Here we go. And we're going to play. Thank you.
I need you to find me a director of sales.
Can you tell me more about the job?
Well, the director of sales does some directing and some selling too, working on a director level to sell things. Got it?
I need you to be much more specific.
I'd like this person to be funny. The last director of sales was very funny. I really like that.
That's not a helpful answer. What about experience?
They should have sales experience, obviously, since sales is in the job title.
So any kind of sales experience is fine?
All right, you can probably relate to that on many different levels. We're going to go back and talk about the video in a minute, but let's talk about what has today changed everything in the world. And it's the technology. It's 140 characters. Even if it goes to 280, that's still not very much. And so we are today in the middle of what has been called the Goldfish Syndrome. And so I want you to know that this changes everything that you're doing. Harvard Business School determined that people would pay attention to something for about 7 seconds. You know, when you think about it, it's so easy to swipe across the screen, so easy to go to the next website, to close out the website. Everything has to capture your attention pretty quickly, and it has to be pretty special to hold your attention. So their research showed that people would keep attention on something for about 7 seconds before they would decide to move on. But the interesting thing was that goldfish can pay attention to something for 9 seconds. This doesn't mean you have to say everything in 7 seconds, but it does change the way you communicate. And so when we are talking today, we need to change the way you're talking to hiring managers And at the same time, what that will do is really strengthen that consultative recruiter reputation, because people will be paying attention, which is certainly a very nice thing. So let's see what happens. Because of the Goldfish Syndrome, what does that mean in the world? It means that people make faster decisions. They may not need all of the information. They're going to decide perhaps before you get too many words out what they want to do. And so they're going to move much faster. They want the bottom line first. It used to be that you provided lots of information and then people would make a decision. And I don't think that happens that way very often. And I suspect that you also make decisions very quickly about things. And when you read articles, when you go to websites, you want to know immediately, what is this about? You want the bottom line first. It also means that everybody is multitasking. I suspect that some of you on this call may even be multitasking, and I totally understand. But multitasking means that people are listening to some things, they're ignoring others, they're forgetting others, and so they're not paying attention. And the bad thing is that it means that the mind won't pay attention to what it has deemed are boring things. Now, I don't believe that what you're talking about is boring. It's important. It's critical. It's to help the hiring manager make a great hire. But a lot of times you may notice that your hiring managers aren't hearing it that way. And so you have to do something different to cut through the multitasking, the need to move on in just a few seconds. The other thing I've learned is that you want to make sure that you don't use words that just drive hiring managers crazy. So we'll talk about what to do instead. But I've learned that for hiring managers, words like, this is my process, or we have to have a good candidate experience, while those are absolutely true and we need to do them, I don't use what I call the P word with hiring managers, because I think it's just a signal for them to tune us out. So we're going to talk about the key way that you can keep people from thinking that you're boring and from multitasking or going away. The whole communication that we have to use today to become a consultant, to be seen as a trusted advisor, is different, but it's actually, in a way, a lot easier. So we need to change the communication. And by the way, this means changing communication sometimes in your postings. If it's a long paragraph, or your LinkedIn summary, if it's a long paragraph, you know, people don't usually read the whole thing. So we have to change not just spoken communication, but written and how we present things as well. So I would say, I have to admit that probably this is true of me. I might be looking at you and it might seem like I'm listening, but a lot of times I'm thinking about something else. And that may also be true of the people that you're talking to. So we have to speak about things in a new way. If they hear something that sounds like what they've heard before, and so it starts to sound like a lecture, then they're going to tune you out. And they can be looking at you but not listening. They may be listening but not believing. And when they believe you is when they take action and take your advice. And that's what all of being a consultant and a trusted advisor is about. Let me share with you the consultative recruiter principles. This is pretty simple and straightforward, which I hope you will find is good news, because that's the best that we can usually do these days. These are really basic concepts. I do not believe at all in a pushback. I know a lot of times recruiters have told me that their managers have said, oh, you've got to push back on the hiring manager, you've got to make them behave. And I don't know about what happens where you are, but where I live, when you push somebody, they tend to push back. So not a good approach. The first thing is to lead by asking questions. And if you take nothing else away from this today, please take this strategy. Ask more questions. Have you noticed that you can ask a question and totally change the topic of the conversation or the tone of the conversation? The one asking questions is the one who's driving the conversation. And I don't think that a lot of us have seen it that way. I mean, your mom might have said, gee, don't ask too many questions, it's impolite. None of us want to ask a question that might sound stupid, or the hiring manager would say, well, for Pete's sake, how long have you been working with us? And you're just now asking that question. So all of my questions are written to make sure that when you ask questions, you're likely to get, oh, that's a good question, I hadn't thought about that before. You're going to get a really good response, and that starts building the relationship. What's really important is that you don't ask any questions that start with why, and I won't go into the reasons for that today. I won't tell you necessarily why questions are bad, but it is in the book that you will be getting when you send in your address. So I hope you will get that and read that. It's a very difficult change to make, probably the only one that's difficult here, but it's truly worth it. So questions are your key to being seen as a consultant. You don't have to have all the answers, though I suspect you have more than maybe the hiring manager might think, but you must ask more questions. And then here's the secret sauce that makes questions even more impactful. When you ask, you stop talking. You wait for them to answer. And I have a hack that I'm going to show you that will deal with one of the major issues you may have as a recruiter. And the real key is always to ask a question and then be silent and let them answer. Don't offer alternatives. You know, recruiters, we're people, and we like to help. And if it looks like the hiring manager is struggling to come up with an answer, we want to give them options. And what I would say is just wait, because when they come up with it on their own, then it is more impactful for them, and it's going to make a better connection between the two of you because you've asked them something that they probably haven't shared before. So ask and be silent. The next is to ask what I call small questions, and you have to keep asking. So when you're asking questions that are what I call too big, and I'm going to give you an example, you don't get good answers. You know, so when in the video she said, well, tell me more or tell me what that is, that's an example of a big question. And the reason you don't get good information is because that's too big a question for the hiring manager to be able to answer. If they had that, they would have told you that in the first place. So let me share one of the hacks with you already. I'm going to share here hacks that will help you with the 5 key problems that are perhaps wasting your time as a recruiter. So we can deal with those. So this was a situation where a recruiter working for me, Gretchen, who was a great recruiter, said to me, oh, I've got a good relationship with the hiring manager. We chit and chat and have a good time, and everything is over the phone. I haven't met many of my hiring managers. And she was doing a very difficult search for a director of network engineering for DirecTV. And she sent him 3 good candidates. It was a tough search because at that time it was incredibly competitive. Sent him candidates, he interviewed them, and he came back and said to her, no, I don't think they're a fit. So when you finally get an answer from a hiring manager and it is, no, they're not a fit, you can't say, well, what's wrong or why not? Because that's too big a question for them to answer. So you might say, you know, were there any things about the candidates? Let's talk about each one. Were there any things about the candidates that you did like? Were there areas where you felt they were missing? Because if you don't know what's different, what needs to be different? How do you know what to look for in the next round of sourcing? So you need to ask very specific questions. If the hiring manager says, no, not ready to make an offer, you can't say, well, when will you be ready? Because, again, that's a really big question. So the question that might be helpful is, has anything changed? Well, obviously something's changed. A lot of times you will ask questions where you really know the answer. But what you want to hear is what does the hiring manager answer to that question? Because you have to be curious. You know, we as consultants, part of what we're after is to change the way hiring managers are doing things. And so we can't change their thinking until we know what they're thinking. So if you ask questions that are very narrow, that small questions is what I call the teeny tiny flashlight. You can't make it like the person's in a chair and you're shining this big spotlight on them and light in their eyes. It has to be very small questions that they will be able to find answers for in their head, or you can help them. But big questions will confuse them. And once you have confused them, they're not going to share their thinking, and you slide out of being seen as a consultant. So here we are, the take a horse to water, can't make them drink. So let's ask small questions, because there's a problem with that concept of take a horse to water. So let's have the conversation with the horse. And I do not, by the way, want you to start thinking of hiring managers as horses. But, you know, there you are, a recruiter, and you say to the horse, you know, how are you? Well, the horse answers, you know, I'm fine. You say, is there anything, I can get for you? The horse says, well, you know, I am kind of thirsty. Small question now, not what do you want to drink, but do you want to drink? Yeah, I think I could use a drink now. Well, there's water over there. How about if I take you over there? Horse says, no, I really like that raspberry flavored water you can get at Walmart. You say, well, I really like that too. It's great, isn't it? But not in our budget. I do see strawberries over there near the water. How about that? Would that work for you? And let's hope the horse says yes. Or if not, he can just stay thirsty. But the point is, you're asking very small questions. And when you're doing that, you are actually leading. The one asking questions is the one who's leading the conversation and actually driving the conversation. The thing that is so tempting for us to do as recruiters is the thing that is guaranteed to keep the search going long, not keep the hiring managers happy. It may even make it difficult to get the right candidates to raise their hand. And it's what I call the okay, go away, get away. I'm thinking that could be a nice country western song, and maybe I'll get it choreographed in a country line dance. But this is what we do. We say, okay, and then we go away because we just can't wait to get away. It's either embarrassing or frustrating. So when the hiring manager said to Gretchen, no, I didn't like any of these people, she said, okay, she told me on the phone, she called me afterwards, and she said, I said, well, what did you say? And she said, well, I just said okay, and I hung up the phone. I said, so what is your strategy now? Oh, she said, I'm going to source harder. I've heard so many recruiters say, I'm just going to work harder, I'm going to try harder, I'm going to work later. That is not the solution, because we don't know what it is that the hiring manager thought they didn't like. A lot of times you will ask these questions and hiring managers will realize that they made a bad decision. Well, just because it says hiring manager doesn't mean that they know how to do it, doesn't mean they like doing it, and it doesn't mean that they necessarily think it's your job, which is kind of interesting. So the okay, go away, get away is the thing that is hard to avoid, but it is the one thing when you stay and ask that will help you be successful. So we're going to talk about hacks that will help you eliminate the 5 biggest time wasters that you may have as a recruiter. And I have found as I've worked with people around the country, recruiters around the country, trained teams and coached individual recruiters, that we all share some number of these. I talked to somebody the other day who said, oh my gosh, I've got all of them, but they are fixable. So the first one, we talked about teeny tiny flashlight, which is small questions and keep it very tight to the direction you want the hiring manager to go. Small questions. Now, it seems like that takes a longer time, and it does. I'm going to be honest with you. But 2 things are happening. One is you're getting really good information about how to move forward in the search. And 2, relationships are really built. Your consultative recruiter reputation is built based on the quality of the questions that you ask. And that's easy because you've got all the experience. You're the expert here. So even though it says hiring manager doesn't mean that they're the expert. So let's do getting a sticky commitment. This is the one that I think wastes more recruiter time around the country than anything else that I know of. And this is when you are trying to get feedback from the hiring manager. And you are trying to figure out when are they going to get back to me, what do they want me to do, what am I supposed to do in the meantime, and you're trying to keep candidates warm, you're trying to figure out should I put more time into this. So it's certainly not in your best image as a consultant to have to keep chasing them, but that's what typically we have to do. You know, when I was starting in recruiting and got what I call cubicle training, which means the person next to me in the next cubicle who wasn't much more experienced than I am was teaching me how to recruit. This business of getting hiring managers was the biggest problem, and it took me a while to figure out how to deal with it. So I'm going to share with you how to get the commitment and then getting them to keep it, because I do realize that sometimes they're not going to keep that commitment the first few times we take them through this. So this tactic will work. Getting the commitment will work the first time and every time you use it. And then as you get them used to it, because I'm going to show you how to get them to keep those commitments, you're going to be amazed at how it changes your relationship and it gets you information, because they keep their commitments to other business partners. You're an important business partner to them. Let's get them to make a commitment and then to keep it. So what you do is, remember, when you're asking questions, you're driving the conversation. So let's say, for example, you're going to send resumes and you want the hiring manager to get back to you with the feedback of which of those candidates they want to interview. So in the launch meeting, or whenever you can, if you don't do a formal launch meeting, you want to ask, when do you think you'll be able to get back to me with feedback on the resumes? And then, secret sauce, you must be silent. Don't give them the, we need to keep the candidates going because that's a good candidate experience, we don't want them to drop off, all of those things where we're trying to justify getting this commitment. You just want to wait. And so the hiring manager says, well, I think, Tuesday afternoon, is that okay? Yep, that's okay. So should I look for them, what, around 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock? What works for you? What works for you is a great way to get their buy-in, get them to tell you what they're thinking and get their buy-in. So what works for you? Yeah, 3 o'clock. Okay, so now on the off chance that 3 o'clock comes and goes without them getting back to you, at 3:15, you want to either call or visit the hiring manager. Don't do this in email, please. Even a voicemail is better, but do it voice to voice, which we don't get much of these days. When we spoke, you thought it would work for you to get back to me by 3 o'clock on Tuesday. That doesn't seem to work for you. What would be better? Now, I know that people often will say to me, well, but I like to be in charge. I like to tell them when I want it back. I like to tell them it's 48 hours. And how does that work for you? A little bit of Dr. Phil, how's that working for you? So the person who said that to me said, well, he said, what I found is that I've trained them. And so he said, I email them and call them, and then eventually I go to their door, and that's when they tell me. So what did we teach the hiring manager by that action? We taught them that it's okay to ignore the calls, it's okay to ignore the emails, because eventually when I'm desperate enough, I'm going to show up. That isn't good for your image. That's order taker image, and I know none of you do that or want to do that. So you need to ask the hiring manager, when we spoke, you thought it would work, what seems to work for you better? And the secret sauce, stop talking. I know you've got lots of good things to say about why that's important, but you must stop talking so that they can do what their brain will do naturally, which is to come up with an answer. Now, I've never had to do that doesn't seem to work for you more than once with a hiring manager on that commitment. Sometimes you might have to do a couple of these different ones to get them into the habit of realizing that you deserve to get a commitment and to get a commitment that they're going to keep. But it doesn't work to tell them. So I'm hoping that this just saves you tons and tons of time. It's saved lots of times around the country, and it's really great fun. I had a young recruiter in Texas, and he was terrified of his hiring manager, one of his hiring managers, and when I shared this, getting the commitment with me, he said, oh my gosh, I can't say that to her. So I said, well, you say it to her, and if she gets angry at you, you can tell her to blame me, the coach that you're working with. And he couldn't wait for the team meeting. He had to call me, and he said, I asked her that question. She never said a word. She just said, oh, I think it could be by such and such. But he said, I don't think she even realized that I'd asked such a bold question. So ask bold questions. The next thing that drives us crazy as hiring managers is when we think the search has gone to bed, we've got great candidates, it should just be down now to decisions and offers, and the hiring manager shows up at your door, you get an email that says, hey, you got any more of those? And you have no idea what the reason is that the hiring manager thinks that there should be more. But one of the key things to do, which is one of the scariest questions that I ever ask, for me, scary question, is in a launch meeting, I will ask a hiring manager how many candidates they need to see in order to feel they've seen the very best of those who raised their hand. Scary question, because you're going, oh, what if they need to see 47? But good to know their expectations. So the hiring manager comes back and says, well, no, I've got more. So here are the questions, right? You must ask questions. It's perfectly legitimate. You are the consultant. You are the trusted advisor, and you are the expert. So you will say things like, are you thinking you'd like to see more like the ones you've seen or candidates who are different, right? So that gives you a lot of info. I just want more of the ones I've seen. Okay. So do you want different skills? What is it that you are looking for? Should it be the same kind of experience? And it may seem to you like I'm asking for the same kind of information with these questions, and you would be exactly right. Because you sometimes have to come at something from different aspects, because then you get different information. And this is really important. Rather than just flush them all wholesale, let's talk about anybody that they might like to move to the next step. And often I've seen hiring managers will say this, they'll ask you questions, when really what they're trying to do is to just get some time before they have to make a decision. A lot of times when you're presenting candidates, perhaps the hiring manager will say, well, do you know if they have thus and such, or have they done that? And you say, well, no, I don't know, but I can get you that information. And then what I've seen recruiters do is they move on. Okay, go away, get away. The question you want to ask is, I can get you that information. Do you need that information before you decide to move the candidate forward? So when you've presented candidates and you get the got more, it's quite likely that you've got some candidates in there who should be moving forward. And that's the important question to ask. But ask very tiny little questions, not like, are you serious, you want more? And then this can be very helpful for hiring managers. Don't do the go away, get away, our little cowboy. You don't necessarily have to do this very often, but this is what Gretchen did to help the hiring manager see that for the Director of Networking Engineering, he actually already had candidates who met the requirements. Now, he might say, yes, but they're still not good. But we certainly want to go through this list and talk about the candidates, and you'll notice I don't bother to rank them on a scale of 1 to 47 or anything like that, which is going to take up so much time. What you want to do is just say, these are the candidates, this is what they're asking for, and this is how they meet the requirements or don't meet the requirements. And a lot of times, send me more can translate into, yes, there are a couple that we can move forward, or no, there's some things missing when I explained what I wanted for the experience, but it gives you that information so that you know what you have to do if you're going to have to go back and source. And I don't know about you, but I like to fill a position fast and move on. I can get bored with positions. So you want to fill it fast, and sometimes this thing, which will take you maybe 5 minutes to fill out, will help the hiring manager see how candidates compare to each other and compare to the requirements. My little symbols here, all of which are meaningful, and I won't take up your time explaining the meaning. This, if we had watched the video further, we would have heard what probably every recruiter has heard or thinks that every hiring manager is thinking. Well, we are just the cutest baby. We are the best company. How hard can it be to recruit for us? We've got all this cool stuff, and everybody must want to work for us. How difficult can it be to recruit for us? So everybody's thinking that we've got this cute little baby, and that all you have to do is go to the door, yell, we're hiring, and then stand back, because there will be hordes of people who can't wait to apply for the positions. And you and I know that's not at all the case. And there can be a whole variety of things that make that not true, but it's difficult to share that in a discussion that doesn't include questions with your hiring manager. Because your hiring manager really doesn't want to hear about we're not competitive, this isn't the, we're asking for them to take a lower title. And so I was doing a lot of searches as an external recruiter at one time for Disney Corporate. And the VP of Finance had been having a lot of trouble filling positions and wanted us to work on some of the positions. So I was doing a launch meeting. And when you get the book, by the way, there is a link so that you can download all the forms, including my precious launch document, which has more questions than you'll need for any one search, but a ton of really good questions that will help you and give you information and build a really good relationship with the hiring manager at the same time. You can build that trusted advisor-consultant relationship pretty quickly, actually. And so when I went to do the launch meeting with him, we had to talk, I felt we had to talk about the elephant in the room. And the elephant in the room was that while Disney had a great reputation and people love to have Disney on their resume, the finance and accounting department had a burn and churn reputation. And so there are certain generations who are willing to do that because they feel it's paying dues. There are other people who don't believe in paying dues, and they were not willing. And at the time, there was more and more competition. There were really great companies, Amazon and Microsoft and Google. There were lots of places these people could go. And so he was having a lot of trouble filling the position. And so we talked about how we would address that reputation with candidates. And I just said, I'm sure you realize this. We need to get out in front of it and address it with candidates. What can we tell them? The more you use the we with your hiring manager, the more the two of you become a team. Not how can I tell them, but how can we? What are you doing? And actually, he had a great plan, and it was really helpful. We addressed that issue right up front. But when I went into that meeting, he was convinced that how hard could it be? We're Disney, and you're probably hearing that a lot. Now, here's one of our favorites. So let's talk about, we do market update, and you want to ask a lot of questions. And one of the things that I do, especially in these situations where the hiring manager just thinks that, we're just the cutest thing that ever was, is just share a little bit of what you're seeing or hearing in the marketplace. And this is really good because this then is what candidates are saying. And you know how to recruit IT people, for example, and you know what's important to them. Whatever functions you're recruiting, you know enough about the candidate to know whether this isn't going to be that cutest baby on the block kind of a search. So I just share briefly what we're hearing in the marketplace. And so I said to him, what we're hearing in the marketplace is that there is a reputation, maybe not deserved, of being burn and churn. One of the questions that I would suggest you ask, even though I know you know the answer, always ask your hiring manager, what makes this a great opportunity? Now, you probably will end up coaching them on some of those things. I had a hiring manager struggling with a search that we took over, and when I asked him this question, he said, I don't think there's anything exciting. I think this is a terribly boring job. Well, that is really not powerful sales copy. So we talked about the things that people who would do that job would find interesting. There's always something, if people are in a function, there's always something about that they love. There's usually a reason they're there. So what makes it a great opportunity? It helps you know what the hiring manager thinks, how they're selling it, and then you, if you need to, can do some training. Well, here are some other things that I think really are exciting about this. And what you're doing then is sharing what makes it exciting to the right opportunities. And I also like to say, how do you feel we compare to other opportunities? Now, you may think you know, but I want to know what the hiring manager is thinking. Well, we have this, pizza every Friday. Who can turn that down? Well, yes, that is cool, but did you realize that these other 5,000 companies have pizzas every Friday? So it's a great way to start that conversation so you don't go away and the hiring manager thinks that all you had to do was open the door and yell that you were hiring. And the last is what I call surprise, surprise, surprise. There you are, you think that search is about ready, and you get this kind of information. Not ready to make an offer. Oh my gosh, a new internal candidate has turned up. My boss turned down the candidate. I want more people to interview the candidate. And I've had that one quite a lot, and you've probably had this happen. And so if you have a hiring manager who does some of these things, hopefully not all of them, but if there's one that they do habitually, then I'm going to show you how you can prepare for it in advance. So if you have a hiring manager who always wants more people to interview, then what you want to do is you want to talk about the interview process in great detail up front. And all the questions for this are on the launch document in the forms that you can download. And I put them all in Word doc format so you can manipulate them, cut them, do whatever to make it work for you in your particular searches. So I want more people to interview. So you want to understand what is the value to the hiring manager for doing that, and not say, well, but it makes a bad candidate experience. You know, I'm going to tell you, I just would never use the term candidate experience in front of the hiring manager. Why? Because the hiring manager's, first of all, fingernails on a blackboard, and secondly, he thinks or she thinks the candidate experience is your responsibility. So in this particular case, I was working with a team, and I went in specifically to help them with their relationship with IT. It was a pretty contentious relationship. And the reality is it had been contentious for almost 5 years, which I think is outrageous and very, very sad. So they had found recruiting was doing a search for IT for a position that was very difficult to fill because the candidate had to have this weird Lawson software, which really was being phased out. And so it was hard to find candidates who had that experience and candidates who wanted to move to Calabasas. You know, Kardashian proximity notwithstanding, not everybody wants to live in Southern California. So they had found a great candidate, and everybody up through and including the hiring manager had interviewed the candidate on the phone and just loved him, thought he was going to be a great fit. So they scrambled. It was Friday afternoon. These things always happen on a Friday afternoon. They scrambled. They got the candidate to agree to get on a plane on Sunday. They got tickets. They got the whole thing. And then the CIO, who typically never interviewed at this level, saw the resume and said, don't like him, cancel the visit. And of course, what did the recruiter do? The recruiter did the okay, go away, get away. And they did not ask what the reasons were that the CIO was turning down the candidate. You know, things like, what do you see on the resume that isn't what you were looking for? Is there anything that you like? So those questions were important. And when we went back and talked, I gave the questions to the recruiter, because I like to be in the background and have the recruiters deal with the hiring managers, but I helped with the questions. And when they went back, it turned out that the CIO had somewhat misunderstood what they were looking for. Of course, the problem is that because we didn't know that until far down the road, that candidate was long gone. So those are the things that just can make your search go on forever. Now, so if you know that you have these kinds of experiences, sometimes no matter what you do, you may find that a hiring manager just goes dark for 2 weeks. So what you want to do is, in the launch meeting, ask this question. When would you like to have this position filled? Now, I know you know the answer to that. You know what they're going to say, right? Yesterday, last week. So you're not really asking that question to hear what he's got to say, though I do think it's an important question. The reason you're asking that question is so later, when your hiring manager goes dark, you can use the format of the commitment question, and you can say, when we spoke at the launch meeting, you wanted this position filled very quickly. That seems to have changed. What has changed? So that you are using information that the hiring manager gave you as a way to find out what it is that's stopping the search now. And so avoid at all costs the okay, go away, get away. So now, please don't do the okay, go away, get away. Stay and tell us what questions you have.
So I already have quite a few, Katherine, so clearly you've inspired our listeners today. So you did mention that candidate experience can often be a dirty word for hiring managers, and they feel like it's the recruiter's responsibility. But often hiring managers don't have any training other than how to weed out candidates Do you have any suggestions on how to get them on board and to buy into the fact that they are part of that candidate experience, especially in this job market?
Yeah, and especially if the candidate is passive. You need, as a recruiter, what you want to do is figure out what is the next step we need to take in order for this to be a good candidate experience. So, for example, it may mean we've gotten the candidate through all the interviews, they're happy, but the hiring manager is delaying making an offer. And so to get the hiring manager on board, and again, I just think words like candidate experience, just that they hear that as a lecture and they just go thinking about what they're going to have for dinner. So what I would say is, this is a really good candidate. Do you agree? Yep, that's a good candidate. And so I would like to make sure that when you're ready to make a decision, you get to decide, and you don't only get to choose from the candidates who are still interested, because this candidate may go away, as you know, and I know you know that. So my question is, what do you think we could do at this point to keep this candidate warm and interested? What do you think we could do? So you decide what is it that you think is a good step for the candidate experience. And ask the hiring manager, what is your suggestion? What do we tell this candidate? You know, when they go to the grocery store, they can't buy groceries with, we think we're going to make you an offer. What would you suggest we tell the candidate so they don't go away? Because you know as well as I do that if the candidate goes away, it's perceived to be our fault. Not that it is, but that's just, we're handy. So get the hiring manager involved in keeping the candidate interested or doing whatever that next step in the candidate experience needs to be.
Great, thank you so much. So then I had a couple of questions about how you talk about calibrating the hiring manager's expectations. Well, we have a couple of people who've asked about high volume recruiting, and how do you make sure that you're constantly calibrating what you're looking for in those positions that you're constantly repeating, and making sure they're current and everybody's still on board with what you may have put together a couple of years ago?
Yes, and oh my gosh, no, not a couple of years ago. So that's a really good question. And you need this, and the hiring manager needs this in order to stay enthusiastic and have a high level of energy. I think that's really critical and very difficult in volume recruiting at times. So what I would suggest is that depending upon whether volume recruiting for you means 200 people a month, or volume recruiting means, you know, I've got to bring in 4 people every month for the next 2,700 years, I would pick up a percentage point, and at that point, I would go and have a conversation with the hiring manager. This is the piece I find that can easily be forgotten when it comes to volume recruiting. Now, I would suggest that you probably want to do that, you know, at least every other week. What did they think of, you know, how's it going? What's happening that you like? Is there anything we should change? Is there anything that you would like to change about the requirements? As you've hired and seen people, and we see people are changing, you know, the generations are different. Are there changes that you can see that we could make in the requirements or the responsibilities? Are there things that you don't think are necessary anymore? What do you think of the candidates we're bringing? And you can talk about what you're hearing in the marketplace, because what candidates are saying about a volume recruiting kind of position today may be very different than what they were saying a few years ago. We're talking about different generations. We're talking about the Goldfish Syndrome. You probably want to redo your postings very often, and you want the hiring manager involved. So any question you have, even if you think you know the answer, ask your hiring manager and make that something that you do on a regular basis.
Okay, and so I've had a couple of comments that, first of all, I have to share with you. We've had a few people say it feels like they've been in therapy, and they thank you very much for sharing their experience, and they want to know how to get in touch with you. And we will send Katherine's contact information in with the email, but I thought that was delightful, so thank you for sharing that. You probably made Katherine's day.
You know, I've been through all of this, and I've worked with recruiters who are going through it. So if you're going through it, I'm really sorry, and I hope it helps that you're not alone and that we have solutions.
So what's the new technology that you're most excited about in recruiting?
Well, I will say, and nobody is paying me to say this. I would tell you that one of the technologies that I think is fabulous is the PeopleFluent ATS. I've seen a lot of ATS systems, and this is the first one I've seen that I think is recruiting sensitive, recruiting aware, and recruiting friendly. And if I were recruiting these days, I would want to use PeopleFluent. I'm telling you, it is amazing. So I'm sorry, I didn't.
I know, that was awesome. I mean, I couldn't have paid her to do that, but you just made my day. So I feel like
really, if you have it, thank whoever purchased it for you. If you don't have it, I really would love to have you look at it if you can, even if you've got something now. But it is absolutely a recruiter tool that's wonderful. You know, there's a lot of stuff that's out there, and we're talking about AI and all of these things, and you know, anything with a CRM, which PeopleFluent has. With a CRM, I think it's helpful. But I'm always amazed that all the new stuff is always directed at the recruiters, and it's often on the candidate side. You know, these are ways to get in touch with candidates, and here's a new Boolean search and all of that. Now, you are already generating candidates. You know how to find candidates. I hope some of these questions will get you information that makes that easier, because you can write really snazzy postings, because people don't want job descriptions as a posting. So I think there's technology. You just have to be careful that people don't bring that technology in thinking that this is going, you want to know how they think it's going to change recruiting. And I'll tell you, the thing that will change it the most right now is building this consultative recruiter relationship with your hiring manager.
Well, I think we've also had a lot of people excited about actually getting the book and the workbook, and have asked questions about how to make sure that they get it delivered to them. So Taya Burns, TAYA.BURNS, and we have so many buzzers going off here. So I guess, Katherine, you're a rock star. You have a lot of phone calls going on.
Getting calls already.
So, but Taya Burns, TAYA.BURNS@PeopleFluent.com will be sending out the book. So make sure you send her your address, and we'll also be sending you the workbook and quite a few other goodies to make you a better consultative recruiter. And you've taken the big first step joining us today.
Yes, thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Katherine, and it's been a pleasure to work with you. And if you want to make sure that you hear more about PeopleFluent, you can email us at tellmemore@peoplefluent.com, and we'll make sure we subscribe you to our list and let you know about future webinars. So thank you so much.
And feel free to give me a call or email me if you've got a situation that you'd like to brainstorm, because I love to talk about this. Share it with you. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. And have a good day.